Finger guns coming in hot. In an underreported move, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis proposed a comprehensive anti-ESG bill. This bill could be a game changer, folks, in the political landscapes in regard to this very important topic. Also, there is a recently uncovered disinformation index, blacklist, that is impacting the news that you are seeing. Also, UFOs. We're going to be talking about this and more in episode 385 of the In the Tank podcast. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. YouTube is still giving us all this trouble over our intro music, so sorry for flip-flopping it constantly. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal. Joining me today, I've got Jim Likely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing great. It's a snow day. I got my snow flannel on, and it's snowing outside, so we closed the office and broadcasting from my undisclosed location. I can't tell anybody where I live. That would be pretty dangerous, but good to be on the show again.
Fantastic. Justin Haskins, how are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing pretty well. It's beautiful outside. I think it's like 50 degrees. It's sunny. It's great. It's really good.
Fantastic.
So I'm doing fine. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, Chris Talgo usually does the podcast from in the studio, in the office, but because we closed it all down, he's trapped at home. He's got no technology over there. He's just got some sticks to rub together for heat, so he will not be joining us today. So we're going to have to do without him, but that's okay. Audio-only listeners who are catching the show on a Friday, probably, you can join us a day earlier. I'm not sure if you've heard this message on a Thursdays at noon Central Time, where we are broadcasting live on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Rumble. You can join in the conversation. Throw your comments and questions in the live stream there. Maybe we'll show your comment on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. Also, do that, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, share this content, even leaving a comment under the video all helps break through these big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. Jim, about a week from now, you are going to be in Orlando, Florida, because we've got our 15th International Conference on Climate Change happening. Week away, sir. What's any new stuff you got to break?
Yeah, well, actually, at this very time, exactly 1 week from today, I will be watching the lunch plenary session. In fact, at this very time, Ian Plimer should be about a quarter of the way through his presentation. He's a geologist from Australia. He'll be talking about climate change from a scientific perspective, like I said, at this time next week. So the conference begins actually, no, I'm wrong. It begins Thursday night with one event. So actually, I won't be doing that. Friday is when Ian Plimer will be doing that. Believe me, I've been doing so much prep for this week. It's been late nights keeping this together, so I'll get a little confused. But it is February 23rd to 25th. At the Hilton Orlando Lake Buena Vista Hotel in Orlando, Florida. If you live in Florida, you can still get tickets. If you don't live in Florida, you can still get a plane ticket and fly down and see this conference. It's fantastic. Some of our featured speakers are Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who has said of climate change that it is BS, although he didn't use the words BS. CNN got upset for him at saying that, and he said, well, I said that because I believe that is true. And in fact, there's a lot to say about that. Representative Lauren Boebert, who is, a big conservative star. She's going to be there with us, but she's not just really about politics, but her history with her family is in the energy industry. So, she has a lot to say. There's going to be a lot of energy talk at this conference. So if you want to understand what's actually happening to our planet, from real scientists who are not there to scare you, they're there to inform you. You should come and see this conference. If you cannot make it down to Florida in a week, and that might be hard for people to arrange their schedules to travel down to Florida, Every single second of the conference will be live streamed on YouTube, but you can get all of the feeds at going to climateconference.heartland.org. I'm sure it's going to be very easy for you to find. You can always just go to heartland.org. There'll be a link right there to the live streams. So, and if you are actually watching on the live stream, just like on this podcast, you can participate in the chat and ask questions during the panels and also during the big plenary sessions for the keynote addresses. So if you can't make it there in person, you can still participate and watch this very informative and important climate conference.
Yes, every single second. That includes live footage of Jim with a camera on his chest trying to wrangle speakers at the last second before panel. So you don't want to miss that. That's gonna be the most interesting part of it.
Yeah.
Yep, awesome, fantastic. Yeah, so Jim's not going to be here next week, folks. So you're going to have to tune in to that conference if you want to see any potential for Jim rants, or just stick it out with us, me and Justin and Chris for next week. But so a lot to talk about, folks. Can we talk about UFOs though? I mean, come on. That's the story that everyone's here for, right? Last week, a whole series of weird events started happening. Kicked off with the China balloon. That was the first thing. And then there was a object over Alaska on Friday that was shot down. And then on Saturday, there was 2 objects, one over Canada, one over Montana. Montana's airspace was shut down temporarily. Trudeau gave an okay for U.S. fighter jets to shoot down an object over Canada. And then another object on Sunday over Lake Michigan temporarily shut down airspace there and eventually was shot down over Lake Huron. So including the China balloon, we had 4 objects shot down over and around the United States over the course of 4 or 5 days. But here's the kicker. We don't know what these objects were. And not only do we not know what they were, they haven't been recovered yet. So they're floating out there somewhere. Basically, no information has been given. Lawmakers go to these meetings and leave saying, quote, yeah, we have more questions than we got answers for. So, Jim, I don't think we've talked about this yet. Do you have any theories on what's going on? Anything?
Well, the big news was that asked directly if these unidentified objects are not of this world, if they are extraterrestrial, that is, the Pentagon at first said, we're not ruling anything out. And that was reflected in the media saying it could be UFOs. Oh, no. But if these are balloons, which they probably are, and they're probably terrestrial in origin, it couldn't have been from outside. You can't, a balloon obviously would not survive entry into the atmosphere. So that's pretty simple. But one thing I do know, we are not going to get a straight answer out of our government. We will never really know what's going on. We'll never really know the extent of whether China or other countries are spying on the United States. We'll never get a straight answer about why this has been allowed to go on for a long time. From an obvious Chinese spy balloon, hey, let's just let it scan the entire United States over some of our most sensitive military positions or facilities in America. And then once it's done with that and it's over the Atlantic Ocean, now we'll shoot it down. I mean, and now that was like from the Chinese spy balloon, right? And now it's like we're trigger happy about these things. As soon as we see it, boom, there goes a missile and it's gone. So I don't think it's UFOs, but I would actually like an explanation as to what the hell's going on and why suddenly we're at a shoot first and ask questions later policy with these things in the air. I don't know. I don't get it.
Yeah, I kind of want it to be aliens. I don't think it is, but I want it to be aliens. And I've heard, and I already see this kind of reflected in some of the comments that we're getting here that like, oh yeah, this is just a distraction. It's a distraction from, Hunter Biden's laptop story. It's a distraction from the Ohio train derailment, which, I understand the instinct to consider all of these potential theories. And in fact, the Ohio train derailment, I'm pretty sure that the Climate Change Reconsidered show, Heartland's other show that's on Fridays at noon, is going to be talking about that. So, we're not going to be distracted from talking about that, folks. So don't worry too much there. But here's my theory. So, Justin, you and I talked about this a little bit, but this is my theory. I think the Biden administration was embarrassed by the China balloon situation. So to counteract that, they are like trigger happy when it comes to any of these objects. And I've seen stories talking about new technology or a new way of tracking different things using military radar that's like being a little bit more sensitive and picking up more objects. So maybe that's why it's, these things are being brought to the attention of the people in charge of shooting stuff down over U.S. airspace. And in order to not have another embarrassment like the China balloon thing, they're just like, oh, yeah, we just got to shoot everything down. That way, the optics look like we're taking care of people and we're not going to let this happen again. And in reality, it is just like a balloon that escaped some kid's Christmas, birthday party or something like that. And they know that, right? They know that, but it would be embarrassing to admit that. So they're just not going to say anything. That's my theory. It's not as sexy as, it's UFOs from, some other galaxy or something like that. But Justin, have you put any more thought into this?
It's all I think about, Donald. It's all I think about. I don't think about anything else other than the balloon. Look, I think that I actually buy Donald's theory. We talked about it for a while. I think that's what it is. I think it's a combination of them being trigger happy and then blowing stuff up and then realizing after the fact, oops, it's not a Chinese spy balloon, so we're just going to say we don't know what it is. Can't find it. What do you mean you can't find it? What does that even mean? You shot it down. You blew it up. You saw it fall to the ground. You can't find it? Like that's an absurd statement. They can find ships underneath the ocean on the bottom of the ocean floor that sank like 500 years ago.
James Cameron on it. James Cameron will find these balloons.
But they can't find a balloon they just shot down last week. Come on, this is totally absurd. What's strange about the alien thing, I think the reason why they were so willing to be like, well, I don't know, could be aliens, could be anything, we don't know. I think the reason they did that fits really well with Donald's theory, because it's like they can't say they know what it is, because if they know what it is, then that would have to admit that they blew something up that they shouldn't have. So instead of admitting that they blew something up that they shouldn't have, they just say, we don't know what it is. But if you don't know what it is, then you can't rule anything out. You have to rule in everything. It could be anything. So they go with this, well, we don't know. Could be aliens. I don't know. We can't find it. We don't know what's going on. We're just blowing things up.
But don't worry. Biden's there to protect you in case it was aliens.
I mean, it's just like, it's so utterly absurd and ridiculous. And Jim is right. Like, we at least deserve to know the answer to what it was. We did blow it up after all, and it was more than one. We blew up multiple things. Are we just is our like national policy now? We just blow things up and then we don't ever talk about it again. Is that the strategy?
Yeah. There's a comment from Gary here that says they found the UFO at Roswell and then claimed it was a weather balloon. And now we're in a time of our history where we shoot down weather balloons and be like, yeah, maybe it was a UFO.
That is funny. It's absurd. It's totally absurd. I think more likely than not, though, I guess if you were going to look at it from a positive, like what's the positive thing here? I would say that the signal, and if I had to guess, I would say this is probably what they're trying to do after the disaster with the Chinese weather balloon that we know was a Chinese weather balloon. They then or a spy balloon. They then come out and say, you know what? We're going to blow everything up now. So if you send it across our skies, we're going to blow it up. And we're serious. We're not just threatening, because look, we just blew up these other things. We don't even know what they are, and we blew them up. So if you think, China, that you're going to send any more balloons over here and that we're not going to blow them up, think again, because we blow up everything. That's what we do. That's our strategy. And so I have a feeling, now that sounds crazy, but does that not sound exactly like something Joe Biden would say in a meeting where he's just like, you know what we need to do? We need to corn pop them. That's what we need to do. We need to send a message to everybody so that they know they mess with Joe Biden, they're going to get smacked around. That's what's going to happen. I think that's totally what is going on here.
All right, we have more important stuff to talk about, but it's just such an interesting story. But I will say, like, in the heat of it, especially after like several days in a row, airspace being shut down, stuff being shot down, that's like, out of the norm for the news stories. There was a point where I was like, what if this is aliens? But that kind of quickly went away.
Hold on, just wait, real quick. If it is aliens, because we talked about this as well, that's also good news, because it turns out we can just blow them up really easily.
Yeah.
We're actually really good at defeating the aliens. So after all these like scaremongering Hollywood films where the aliens are always knocking us around, turns out we just wipe the floor with them. So that's a good thing too.
We didn't realize that the aliens come from a culture of thousands of years of being nerfed down by ESG type policies, where their UFOs are just like tinfoil that we could just knock out of the sky, no problem.
Yeah. Well, wait. Just one last thing. It's like, so there are still in the sky. UFO, as Gary, our listener here, pointed out, stands for unidentified flying object. That's it. There's nothing conspiracy theory about it. UFO just stands for something in the sky that a pilot, an experienced pilot, cannot identify. They know what another plane looks like. They know what a Zeppelin looks like. Now we know what weather balloons look like. They're aware they shouldn't be. But if you remember, if you watch Tucker Carlson, there are things in the sky that our military pilots see that are going super fast, that they can't explain what that thing is, how it's moving, and all that stuff. So the theory, if you remember the little Tic Tacs, and some of them go into the water and come out and fly around. I mean, these are pilots who have been in the skies for their entire professional lives and don't know what the hell they're looking at. And the theory was that these must be from China. Now, if those are from China, what the hell's a weather balloon? If they could do that, why would they send a balloon to float for 3 weeks across the country instead of just sending one of those things out there? So, I don't believe that there is alien technology flying around the world right now, but there's still a lot of stuff in the sky that we can't explain. And maybe we'll that's a serious thing. And I think we should probably get to the bottom of that.
Yep. I'm sure Biden will be right on it. He'll be forthcoming with any information shortly. All right. Big story, folks. Big story. This is a big one. As our constant listeners should know by now, we've been at the forefront of the ESG fight for a long time now. We were among the first to sound the alarm on the Great Reset in ESG back in 2020, I think. Justin and I worked with Glenn Beck to warn as many people as possible about the Great Reset and its backbone, environmental, social, and governance standards, which works like a social credit score for businesses around the world. Full implementation and adherence to ESG would transform our global form of capitalism into a system controlled by the ESG rule makers and their agenda. It's designed to enforce all of the worst aspects of climate change policy, DEI policy, and has the potential to destroy any business or industry that falls out of political favor. Think firearms manufacturing and sales. It's an end around to accomplish the goals that would be out of reach politically. And since sounding the alarm, a ton of people have realized the harm and inherent risk of this system and have, too, joined the fight against ESG. This includes lawmakers and officials across the country. And as we've mentioned on the show numerous times, we're blown away by how the terms ESG and the Great Reset have so permeated the conservative lexicon. Like, it's just, you can't turn on Fox News without hearing someone talk about ESG every other day. This traction has resulted in a lot of action on the state level. States throughout the country have begun fighting back, considering and in some cases passing legislation targeting ESG. In some cases, state treasurers have used their power to curtail aspects of ESG. And this has all been great, but one could argue that it's all been baby steps in a fight to take down a system that is so well supported from the most powerful and influential institutions around the world, with financial support to the tune of hundreds of trillions of dollars. Well, just this week, we got a huge piece of news. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, on the day before Valentine's Day, trying to capture my heart, announced comprehensive anti-ESG legislation aimed at protecting the state's citizens, taxpayers, businesses, and industries from these ESG standards. So, Justin, you brought this to my attention. Do you want to run through the proposal and explain why it's might be the best anti-ESG legislation that we've seen yet?
Right. So there have been a number of states that have proposed various solutions to ESG, some better than others, but a whole bunch of states, it's more than 30 that have proposed at least something. 11 states have actually passed ESG bills of some kind or have put ESG restrictions in place at the executive branch level or through like a straight treasurer's office or something like that. All of those things are really, really positive. Anything we can do to limit ESG is a good thing. However, most of the things that have been done so far on ESG, or essentially all of them, have dealt with one of two issues or both. it's either about dealing with state contracts, so that it's trying to restrict governments from working with institutions that are actively trying to impose ESG. So, for example, BlackRock is out there trying to force people to adopt ESG principles. And in particular, they want to run the fossil fuel industry completely out of business. And so what governments started doing is saying, well, gee, this doesn't make a lot of sense. We do business with fossil fuels. It's a huge part of our economy. So why are we doing business with people who are trying to destroy a huge part of our economy? Similarly, another sort of a strategy for limiting ESG has been to deal with it from the pension perspective. There's all these big public pensions. They have massive amounts of money, public pension funds in the United States. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars, right? And these pension funds have largely been very supportive of ESG social credit scores. And so what some states started doing is saying, whoa, we're not going to give public money, which is what ends up in a pension fund, right? That's coming from taxpayers. We're not going to use public money to undermine our economies and to limit people's free speech rights and other things, which is all part of ESG. That's what's been done so far, and that's all really good and important stuff. But what this bill does, that's being proposed in Florida, what it would do if it passes, is it would do those things. It would do a lot of those things, some of which have already started happening in Florida through the executive branch, but this would codify some of that in the law. But in addition to that, it would also put restrictions on banks and other financial institutions who are using social credit scores as a way to coerce individuals and businesses and whole industries to move toward the left on a variety of different causes. So the way that has worked historically is you'll have a bank or an insurance company or whatever, and they'll say, okay, do you have, if you have a delivery service, let's say they want a loan, a small business loan or something. Okay, do you have any plans of buying electric vehicles? No. Do you use electric vehicles in your fleet right now? No. Oh, you do use electric vehicles. Well, how many? Oh, just a couple? Okay, well, we want you to use all electric vehicles. So if you want a loan from us, you have to have all electric vehicles. Okay. Or in some cases, we've heard stories of financial institutions telling customers, how committed are you to battling climate change? Have you said this publicly? Oh, you haven't said this publicly? Could you post a statement online saying publicly what your views are on battling climate change? And then maybe we could do business with you. We actually have that.
Literally happened.
That literally happened. So we have all kinds. It's not just about climate change and energy and stuff like that. That's a big part of it. It's about all kinds of other things too. The entire gun industry, manufacturing, sellers, etc. They have been screened out of certain banks. They've said, we're not even going to do business with you if you're involved in this in any way, right? So that's what banks and financial institutions are doing. Insurance companies are doing the same thing, and they've been very explicit. They're going to expand this dramatically in the coming decades. So what you're going to have is the financial sector is going to essentially impose left-wing ideology on the entire country, and not just in America, but in Canada and in Europe too. On everybody, whether you want to do it or not. Because if you can't get a bank loan, if you can't get a mortgage, if you can't get a car, if you can't get insurance, then you can't exist as a business and basically as an individual that owns any property. So through those means, they're controlling people. That's the plan. So what this legislation is going to do in Florida, if it passes, is it's going to stop, at least in Florida, because obviously it's a state bill, it's going to stop financial institutions operating in Florida from using ESG and non-financial factors from making these decisions. So banks and financial institutions can still say, hey, we're not going to give you a loan because we don't think you can pay back the money. Or we're not going to give out a loan because, we have some other sort of financial concern. But they're not going to be able to say, you voted for Donald Trump and you posted it on social media, so we're not going to give you a loan. Or you worked as a volunteer in the Trump administration, and so we're not going to give you a loan. Or we don't like this thing you said about XYZ issue of the day, transgenderism on social media, so we're not going to give you a loan. Or you don't have enough electric vehicles, so we're not going to give you a loan. Or you don't say that you're a climate change warrior, so we're not going to give you a loan. Or we're not going to give you insurance, or we're not going to let you have a bank account with us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This legislation would aim to stop all of that, so that you have to base the decisions on financial considerations alone and let the free market be the free market. If you're a business and you're a public business and you're operating in the public marketplace, you should be open for everybody, as long as they're not doing something illegal and as long as they're financially qualified. And that's what this bill would do. And if it passes, it would be the first time that anything like that has passed at the state level. And at the federal level, we've had regulations like that under the Trump administration, but Biden got rid of those. And so now there's no protections for individuals now at all on ESG. So that's what this would do.
Jim, it seems like we've come a long way from ESG being like a term that just kind of came off as jargon, investment jargon that everyone just like, whatever. I don't know what that is. Don't care. Now we're getting to this point where it's like getting center stage attention. What are your thoughts on this story?
Yeah, I mean, it's great that people, and I know that the work of the Heartland Institute has had a lot to do with this. People are getting wise to ESG. You're seeing references to it. I watch a lot of pop culture, kind of nerd comic book movie stuff channels on YouTube. Even if I don't even watch the movies, I just think their critiques of our pop culture are very interesting to watch, because it's a critique from the idea that leftism and the message of DEI and all that stuff is just soaking our pop culture right now, that it's not there to entertain us anymore. It's there for propaganda. And some of these guys, over the last just maybe 6 months they're using the term ESG. They're putting that into their reviews. They're talking about these issues. They're talking about the Great Reset. It's mentioned during their live streams and some of the produced videos they do. Nerdrotic is one of those channels I highly recommend to people. Our listeners here are mostly, I would imagine, on the right. His videos are very entertaining, but they are awake. They're not woke. They're awake to the indoctrination by the left into not almost every aspect of our government, academia, and culture. And what's going on with ESG and why it's so great that Ron DeSantis is pushing back on this, and it's going to have a domino effect. There will be other states that are going to take just as strong measures as DeSantis did, or even stronger, because this is fighting, frankly, fascism. That's what this is, straight up. The left, the deep state, whatever you want to call it, they're not satisfied with the laws that they have passed and the regulations that they have implemented and the control they have over academia and the culture and Hollywood and all that stuff. They need to go farther. They have to have now control of the banks. They have to have complete control. And what ESG really is at its essence is fascism, a partnership between the agenda of the government, which is dominated by the left, not just the United States, but all around the world, and using business. The only place where people might be able to escape in a quote unquote free market is commerce, in business. So now they've roped that in too. And that's actually the most powerful weapon they have in their arsenal to impose a leftist socialist agenda on the United States and the world. And it is, as Justin explained, you think you can participate in commerce and have a business without adhering to our ideology? Here's news for you. You won't be able to, because we won't allow the banks to lend you money to start a business unless you adhere to all of our ideology. It is enforcement of leftist ideology through especially the banking system, but it's like a complete holistic enforcement of leftist ideology. They're trying to make it impossible to escape it, and you can't have your own ideas. It has to be the left's ideas, and if you don't adhere to them, you're out. You're out of our commerce system. You're out of Hollywood. You're out of academia. You're out of everything. And so that's why it's super important that if you're on the right and you think blocking ESG mandates is somehow an intervention in the market, you need to get awake. You need to understand what's happening here. It's not an intervention in the market so much as it is a protection of free markets and freedom and liberty. That's why it's so great what's happening here, and it needs to spread, because it's not going to happen from the federal government. It's going to have to happen state by state.
Right. Yeah. In addition to releasing a press release, Governor Ron DeSantis also held like a 30-minute long press conference where he talked about the legislation and the threat of ESG. And I think we have a clip from that conference. Let's go ahead and play that clip.
The subject of today is tackling this issue of ESG. Now, they created this. These things just happen. I don't know where this stuff comes from. but these elites grab it and they really want to impose it on the rest of us. So it's called environment social governance, but basically I think what it's devolved into is a mechanism to inject political ideology into investment decisions, corporate governance, and really just the everyday economy. That is not ultimately something that is going to work out well for us here in Florida or in the United States of America. There's not a real groundswell for this amongst the average citizen. I think this is something where you have a lot of folks, not just in the United States, but internationally. Sometimes they convene in places like Davos, and they have these ideas to try to do this.
Yeah, so the whole thing was, like I said, like 30 minutes long. I watched the entire thing. I thought it was a really good press conference, and you can tell just by the way that the conference was set up that it was kind of like a big to-do. They had like the little signage on the podium. It seemed like there was a bunch of people in the crowd. He had like 5 other people that he brought up on stage at one point to talk about different aspects of ESG. So it wasn't just some like, oh yeah, we're kind of doing this on the side. It seemed like a very important deal for him. But as I was watching it, I noticed a couple of things that kind of struck me. So one is his messaging was on point. I mean, we've heard people talk about ESG that is just like, yeah, I think you kind of get it. It really seems like Ron DeSantis gets it, or at least like he's just like he was just recently starting to fully get it. So he correctly recognizes the magnitude of this problem. There's too many people on our side of the aisle for far too long that just kind of wrote off ESG as just like a bad investment strategy and nothing more than that. And I mean, that is the case. It is a bad investment strategy, but it's far more than that, as Jim and Justin already explained. The second thing that struck me was he references how ESG is pushed by that it's an elite-driven agenda. He mentions that it's an elite-driven agenda multiple times. Even in that clip, you heard him mention Davos specifically. He mentions Davos like several times during this entire conference. And he mentions how ESG pushes policies that would not be able to get through the standard legislative process. And he also brings out at one point a firearm business owner who had already been victimized by ESG. This guy explains how his bank shut down his accounts because not of any financial reasons, but just because of the type of business he was involved in. And this highlights just how ESG can continue to transform and quash any industry that kind of falls out of political favor. So all of these things were highlighted very nicely during this press conference. Justin, did you watch the whole press conference? Did you have any other takeaways or anything you want to reply to of the stuff I just said?
I think you're exactly right. Ron DeSantis clearly gets it. The only other thing that I would add is that I think it's important because we, at the Heartland Institute in particular, we have a special place in our hearts for state lawmakers. We've been working with state lawmakers very closely for a long, long time. They don't get a whole lot of credit oftentimes for things that happen because governors are usually the face of these things at the state level, and most people are focused on what's going on in Congress, and so, or the president and UFOs distracting everybody. And so state lawmakers don't get a lot of credit, but state lawmakers really are, in many cases, some of the unsung heroes of these things. And state lawmakers have been pushing for this all across the country, even in states where they have no chance of passing it, in places like Minnesota, and even in Rhode Island, we had a state lawmaker reach out to us about this. And so state lawmakers all across the country are the heroes of this. And in Florida, unlike in certain other places where you might have some people you might have a governor who wants to do something on ESG, but people in the leadership of the legislature don't, or you might have legislative leaders who want to do something, but the governor doesn't. What makes Florida really special in this case is that you have both the governor, Ron DeSantis, obviously a huge figure in Florida and nationally pushing for this, but you also have the Senate president, Kathleen Passidomo, who's a big supporter of this as well, and the House Speaker, Paul Renner, and Representative Rommel, and other people in the legislature who are not necessarily in leadership roles, but who have been advocating for something being done on this issue, who also deserve a lot of credit. There are a lot of people in the legislature in Florida are behind this. And so if it becomes law in Florida, it's not going to be because Ron DeSantis is emperor of Florida and he proclaimed that it would happen. It's going to be because Ron DeSantis and a bunch of other people all working together as a team have pushed for this and are going to get it across the finish line. So huge news from Florida, not just because Ron DeSantis is behind it, but because you have lots of people in the legislature there making the right decision. And hopefully, I'm so hopeful that this is going to be a turning point for ESG nationwide because of who Ron DeSantis is, because of how important Florida is, because of how successful Florida has been, because everyone in leadership in the House, the Senate, and in the governor's mansion are all working together. This is the blueprint. So Texas, I'm looking at you in particular. Why are you letting Florida mop the floor with you? I don't know. Maybe you should do something on this. Other states need to get on board. So,
yeah, well, Jim, you kind of mentioned it that you would hope that this kind of spreads across states. In the press conference, Ron DeSantis says that he's excited that Florida is leading the way on this fight against ESG, and that he hopes that other states will follow suit. I mean, this could be like even bigger news than what is happening in Florida. Florida doing something like this would be fantastic. But the greatest impact that this could have is if this starts off like a domino effect. You see Texas follow suit, and then followed by a whole bunch of other red states, and then it just goes across the country. Is that am I being too hopeful there? What do you think?
Well, actually, I want to ask Justin if that's too hopeful, because he and I have had private conversations about this topic for years now, and it's. I think, Justin, you'll have to remind me, how much capital does BlackRock control, and how much capital does Vanguard control? Like the big three who are all pushing this ESG, they're using their muscle. How much capital are we talking?
Yeah, it's complicated because the numbers are a few years old and the stock market has gone down since those. But the big three, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 to $30 trillion in capital. Yeah.
Right. So every, when something good would happen on the ESG front, I'm like, wow, that's good. I think West Virginia, maybe a year ago put something out. It's like, so see, that's good. And you're like, dude, we're talking about $20 trillion of capital. That is not going to do anything. Withdrawing your pension fund, for instance, from Vanguard or something, isn't going to stop them from doing ESG. They won't even notice that. That's not even a pimple on an elephant. It's a gnat. It's a gnat flying past the earth. I mean, it's nothing. But I think, as we're talking about here, seems to be something fundamentally different. And we have seen stories coming from time to time where, these funds, look, they're in the business. They may be spiritual socialists, but they're still capitalists at heart. They still want to make money. They still have a fiduciary duty to do that. They just seem to be able to think they can have it. They can have their socialism and their capitalism together. They can enforce socialism on the people, but rig the system so that they're the ones who make all the money. To hell with everybody else who just may get crushed on the way. But that seems to me to be the way it was playing out. But now it seems like they're starting to get a little wobbly. And it's not just this Florida thing. There's some other areas. You see stories where like, ESG, maybe not. I think we need to focus on profitability and things like that. So actually, I'd like to hear Justin, not defend himself, but convince me again that this is different. We are talking $22 trillion of capital, which is more power than, frankly, all the governments in the world combined, perhaps, because it's economic power. And that that's permanent and that lasts beyond any certain politician or even regime in a country anywhere in the world.
Yeah. So let me start off by making my job harder, and then I will, hopefully give people the impression that there's no need to jump off a bridge after that. It's not just the big three. There's a group called Principles of Responsible Investment. There's another group called, this is an international group, and there's another group called the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. Both of those have kind of emerged out of the United Nations movements. These are international movements promoting ESG. There's a heavy focus on climate change and energy and stuff like that, but there's also a focus on other things as well, tied up in all of this, right? The members of those groups who have signed up to them, we're talking over $100 trillion. Okay. Over $100 trillion. Far, far more than the entire GDP of the United States of America. Okay, so we're talking about massively wealthy institutions, governments, pension funds, and private investors and investment management firms and all of that. And they take that wealth and they use it to vote their shares and to coerce people and to use their financial power to impose their will on others. And that is way more money than all the Republican pension funds in the world combined. All the conservative pension funds all across the planet cannot equal that much wealth. All right. So that's the scary thing. That's the hard part in all of this. But that's why it's so important for this fight to not only be focused on let's make sure that our money is going toward the right cause, which is what the first two kinds of proposals that I mentioned earlier, the contract thing and the pension fund restrictions, those things are good. And we need to do everything. We need an all of the above approach. Okay. No doubt about it. But those things on their own can't beat $100+ trillion. It's just mathematically impossible. So if you're always going to go where the money is, and that's all this is going to become, then we're going to lose. That's obvious. So what makes this bill different is they're not just saying, Florida is not just saying, hey, we're not going to put any of our public dollars towards this anymore. We're going to put it in things that are actually opposed to it. They're saying that, plus we're not even going to let you do business in Florida if that's how you're going to act. If you're going to start silencing people and you're going to force fossil fuel industry at large to die, and you're going to make everybody buy an electric car, and you're going to make everybody put solar panels on their roofs, and they're going to make everybody live in ways that they don't want to live, you're going to silence people on social media, you're going to do all this other stuff. If that's how you're going to act, then you're not welcome in Florida. We'll have other businesses in Florida who will make lots of money here not doing that. And so it's normally, we don't like regulations. We're conservatives. We don't like that. But when you have a cronyist, corrupt system, which is unfortunately a lot of our economy is like that right now, then you need to make sure that if you are going to put regulations in place, they're enhancing liberty, enhancing freedom, improving the free market. And that's the point of all of this. So I think that's what differentiates this from everything else. In the same way that we have laws, and this is really important for people to get, we have laws on the books right now that say you can't, if you're a business, say, sorry, you're black, so I'm not going to serve you here. Okay? Everybody has that law. Nobody has a problem with that. All we're saying is let's do that. Plus, let's not discriminate against people because of something they posted on social media, or because they voted for Donald Trump, or because they voted for Barack Obama, or whatever. Let's just say, let's just make business about business and leave all these other non-business factors out of it so that we don't have widespread discrimination. That's all we're saying. And I think that's a completely reasonable policy to put into place.
So there's one other aspect of this that I want to address, and we have another topic that I want to get to. But Justin, do you remember probably a year ago, maybe even longer? I have no sense of time anymore ever since having a kid. But we were talking about like the rosiest of scenarios. What are the best case scenarios when it comes to this fight against ESG? And I remember us talking about, like, wouldn't it be great if someone like, I don't know, Ron DeSantis made this issue one of their core issues, and then he decided to run for president, and this became like a platform for his campaign. And I feel like after this announcement and this press conference, like, we're right there. Like, this could be a thing, you know?
Yeah.
And then not only that, but what's his name? Vivek Ramaswamy, right? Is that his name? He's like a big anti-ESG guy. He's considering throwing his hat in the ring to run for president. And it's like between DeSantis and him being part of the conversation, it's like, surely this ESG, this anti-ESG talking point platform is going to get a lot of spotlight, among contenders of the Republican primary. Do you have any comments on that, Justin?
Yeah, I think that the only real solution long term is you have to have a federal law that does it. Long term, there's got to be a federal law. Okay. You can't just have these policies in Florida and Texas and then that's it. Like, if we're really going to stop this from becoming an issue nationwide, we need a federal law. And there were federal regulations put in place under Trump, and then that that fell away because Biden came in, and you can easily get rid of an executive order, can easily be rescinded. You can make a new executive order that does something else. And that's exactly what Joe Biden did. So we need a federal law in place that protects people. And I think the only way that's going to happen is if ESG becomes a national issue. And the only way that's going to happen is if you have, or the most likely way that will happen is if it becomes an issue for the presidential campaign. That's the primary way you get issues on the national stage. And the only way that's going to happen is if we have people who run for office that care about it at the federal level, that have a chance of actually winning or at least making some noise. And all of that, when we first started talking about this stuff, that didn't seem likely. That scenario, there's a lot of ifs in there. If. And it does seem like all those things are happening.
Right.
And it is remarkable and very unlikely. But it was very unlikely. It seems more and more likely as time goes on. If Ron DeSantis really does make this a pillar of his campaign going forward, assuming he runs for president, and I think he will, other candidates will have to respond to it. They'll have to do something about it. And let's be honest, right now, it's looking more and more like the two people most likely to be presidents of the United States on the Republican side is either going to be Donald Trump, who really has never said anything about this, or Ron DeSantis, who has said a lot about this now. And I don't think that you're going to have to do much convincing to get Donald Trump to go after the woke corporate media and all this other stuff. I'm pretty sure he's probably fine with it.
Yeah,
just no one's brought it up to him yet.
He'll accuse Ron DeSantis of being too soft on ESG, and he'll go even harder.
Yeah, exactly. And
that's
so
what we need. We need an anti-ESG arms race between all of the political candidates running for the primary of the Republicans.
Agreed. And so that is the hope, and I do think there's good reason to believe that could happen.
Jim, I'll give you final word, but I do want to move on to the next topic.
Sure. I mean, let's just actually take a moment and enjoy the fact that we are at this moment in the pushback against ESG, because the proponents for ESG have literally everything working in their favor, or they have until now. ESG stands for environment, basically protecting the environment, social justice. And, that has a, well, not with us, but for a lot of people that has a good connotation, and governance. In other words, governing, good governance practices, right? That's propaganda, but they have that in the very name of it, And so the idea that we're able to successfully communicate that what ESG actually is leftist fascism, which is the imposition of an ideology against the will of people. There's going to be no voting on that. There's going to be no discussion about that. It's just going to be imposed by the most powerful entities, literally the most powerful entities on earth, that being, big finance. So let's enjoy this little victory. We need about 1,000 more of them. That's that's how an avalanche starts, with one pebble.
That's right.
And maybe that's what's happening here.
Yes. So I want to. This next story is kind of related to this whole idea, and it's a story that was brought to my attention by a town hall article. So we've been covering on this show a whole lot about censorship of conservative thought on social media and the internet and all of that. If you've listened to this podcast even once or twice, you've probably heard us talking about it. So I was sent this article from Town Hall, which we have a lot of op-eds that are published in Town Hall all the time. And it's titled "Secret Blacklist Exposed. Town Hall Labeled Reprehensible and Offensive on List Targeting Advertisers." So Jim or Justin, you can correct me if I'm wrong in my assessment here, but from what I understand, there is a nonprofit in the UK called the Global Disinformation Index, who put together an index composed of what they consider peddlers of disinformation. The index includes a lot of popular websites, including American Thinker, who they labeled false and misleading, Town Hall, which they labeled reprehensible and offensive, which is just like, okay. Glenbeck.com, which they labeled false and misleading, Drudge Report, Newsbusters, CNS News, a whole bunch of other ones. You could see the list there, at least that's part of the list, if you're watching the visual component of this podcast. And well, okay, great. Like, who cares? We could put together a list called the Global Losers Media Index and put MSNBC and CNN right at the top. We could do the same thing. Well, it appears as though advertisers are using this index as a roadmap to identify sites that they should not advertise on, potentially financially harming said sites. So, Jim, I mean, this kind of seems like par for the course at this point, but like, man, it's just getting brazen. What do you think?
Well, yeah. What was it? I think we talked about this on Slack, messaging each other, and I may have typed the words. Sometimes you're not paranoid. Sometimes they really are out to get you, and this is one of those cases. And like we know that right wing, or I should say, I like to frame it this way: we do know that non-leftist speech and communication has been for years suppressed on social media giants like Twitter and especially Facebook, which people don't talk enough about. There's a lot of suppression going on there. But now to have it extended to, so there are monopoly or monopolistic positions in advertising, digital advertising. It's not all Google ads. There are others, although it's mostly Google ads. But my point being, there are very few avenues that you can go if you run a website like Town Hall or Red State or something where you can attract advertising to help support yourself, your website, and your writers. And here we have exposed a conspiracy to label everything that is not leftist as right here, every false, misleading. And I think Town Hall's was like reprehensible and offensive. Town Hall, reprehensible and offensive. False and misleading wasn't a strong enough insult or lie, I should say, about this.
Yeah.
They have to call them reprehensible and offensive. And I'm offended by that, or actually we should be flattered by that, because Chris Talgo, Justin Haskins, and others at the Heartland Institute are published on Town Hall every week. So we're among the reprehensible and offensive people here.
That's probably why they got labeled that.
Probably. But my point being that, there is a global conspiracy. Let's just say this. It's remarkable how much coordination has been going on behind the scenes to make sure that anybody who disagrees with the leftist message is silenced. They will be silenced. They will be shadow banned. They will be shamed. They will be called out. They will have mobs come to their homes. They will have their jobs put in peril because the leftist mob online will come after them. And now we have it. And now we have proof here that the system has been rigged so that anything that's non-leftist will be called false, misleading, reprehensible, and offensive, and thus nobody should be letting them their businesses advertise on those sites because they wouldn't want to be associated with this kind of stuff.
Well,
and the fact that it's all just taken, they all just take their word for it and go ahead. Okay, great. I guess you're right that Charlie Kirk, his website shouldn't get any advertising because that would be hateful and all that stuff. And it's only after it's exposed do they back off. In other words, there's nobody in any of these institutions, nobody who is of honest mind, who thinks to themselves, this sounds wrong to me. I don't think we should be singling out viewpoint discrimination. Nobody anywhere has a hint of a pang of conscience to say that in a room with other people. That's what I think one of the big stories here is.
Well, let's be clear too, because I've always said that the left is really good at the linguistical battles here, and then they always put us in a position where we're over here seemingly defending misinformation, and that is not the case. That's not the case when it comes to like hate speech either. It's like, who's in charge of labeling this stuff disinformation? Who's in charge of labeling this stuff a hate speech or something? It's like if Justin runs an article talking about how X policy is a bad course to pursue. Oh, that's disinformation. It's like, what? No, it's just like his opinion based on all of the information that he's come across. So that's where this gets like really insidious. But I just wanted to make that point. But Justin, how did we get to this point? Like, it just seems like this was not a thing that many years ago. I feel like if you lined up all of the biggest libertarian and limited government thought leaders like 20 years ago and asked them like a series of hypothetical questions, like Milton Friedman, what if there was a social media company that was so influential that they essentially controlled the media consumption of tens of millions of people, and they decided what content that they would allow to be shared on their site? Like, what would you do? Or what if advertisers all adhered to a politically biased disinformation index that unfairly labeled their political opponents of the index as bad? Or what if a cabal of the most influential people and organizations created a massive social credit system that rewarded or punished businesses depending on whether they pushed a specific agenda? I think Milton Friedman would look at you like you were a crazy person. But yet this is the reality that we find ourselves in today. What do you think about that, Justin?
Yeah, I think that if you start from that perspective, you start with that part of the equation, then yeah, it seems like that stuff does not seem like likely to especially back, we're talking 10, 20, especially 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. The idea was that the free market will make sure that's the supply and demand and market forces. That's going to keep things from getting off the rails, because at the end of the day, people want to make money. So they're not going to do these things. You're going to have advertisers saying, we're not going to advertise with Town Hall because they can make money at Town Hall. They're not going to do that. You're not going to have banks say, we're not going to give loans to qualified applicants because they don't drive an electric car, because they want money. They want to make money, right? That was the idea. If you start from there, I don't think it makes sense. And I think you would have people who say, I think I would have said that 5 years ago, probably, right?
Right.
So, but if you start from the perspective of what I think is the foundation of all of this, is the endless, constant printing of money, coupled with cronyism from government mixing in with corporations and financial institutions and working hand in hand with them. And you say, and you start from there, and you go to Milton Friedman 50 years ago, and you say, okay, imagine an America 50 years from now where the Federal Reserve is printing trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars that it doesn't really have. It's just inventing it. And then it's distributing it to banks, which are working hand in hand with government and insurance companies and BlackRock and all these other big investment management firms on Wall Street. And they're taking that money and they're giving it to people who they think the government likes, and they're withholding it from people the government doesn't like. What do you think that world would look like? I don't think he would say, well, given those parameters, hopefully that doesn't happen. I don't think he would say, well, that's crazy. I think he would say, if that's what happens, if the Federal Reserve really does just go off the rails and prints trillions and trillions of dollars and at will and just starts giving it to big institutions in bed with government, you're in trouble. You're in real trouble. I think he would completely understand that. And I think that's what's going on here. I don't think this is just people choosing. These aren't Bernie bros, okay,
right,
that are the head of these big corporations like Bank of America. Like Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America, isn't a Bernie bro, okay? Bernie Sanders isn't going to Davos. He's not welcome there, okay? The reality is you've got people like Greta Thunberg outside singing songs about how everybody inside Davos is an a-hole, okay? That's basically what's going on. So the people who are in charge of this are doing it because they can make money and control the world. They can do both. And isn't that great? And that is how every corrupt society has always operated. The Soviet Union was the same way. They were all communists until they realized, hey, we could be rich too. And then they stopped being communists and they just became authoritarian, cronyist, quasi. Yeah, exactly. And that's what's going on here too. But from the opposite end of the spectrum, where they started as a free market, they started with worrying about market forces, and now they've moved into, well, it would be easier than this whole supply and demand thing and making goods and products that people like and winning over customers. It would just be easier if the Federal Reserve printed the money, gave it to the banks, and then they gave it to us. Wouldn't that just be better?
Right.
And that's exactly where we're at. And if you're going to have a world like that, then you got to say, okay, well, how do we know who to give the money to? And that's where ESG comes in. It's, well, if you have a high ESG score, then you get the money. If you don't, then you're out. And so it all makes sense if you start from market forces have gone out the window in a lot of cases, and now we're just dealing with cronyism and corruption and endless printing of money, and that's the foundation.
Right. That's why I always describe ESG and all of these different things that relate to it as the biggest cronyist system ever devised by man. And all of these things just seem to be tentacles off that main Leviathan monster. Jim, I'm going to give you final words on this. We're running out of time.
No, I think that's exactly correct. And the enemy to these people is freedom. You're not supposed to have you can't have a free market, because then people and businesses will make decisions that are not approved by those people that are in power. It's always against freedom. They're always afraid of your freedom. Always remember that and work to preserve it.
Absolutely. All right. Fantastic. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Join us every week for a new episode. Like I said, for those audio-only listeners that are catching the show on a Friday, you can join us a day earlier on Thursdays at noon Central Time, where we are live streaming on Facebook and Twitter and Rumble and YouTube. You can join the conversation, throw your comments and questions in the live chat. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. And also, you could help out our channel just by doing a handful of things that won't cost you a penny, only it'll cost you a couple of seconds. One is hitting that subscribe button if you haven't already, sharing this content, leaving a comment underneath the video, or just hitting that like button. All help break through those big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. Jim Likely, where can the fine people find you?
At J Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
Fantastic. Justin Haskins, same question.
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Getter, and at stoppingsocialism.com.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Join us next week.